So, Kim, the professional path you have created for yourself is very unique. And you spent
Yes.
years teaching and coaching. And you wrote recently, I soon realized that my work wasn't going to look like traditional therapy, counseling, or coaching. My mission was to take my clients to a particular vibrational frequency.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So it's been super circuitous. I really was following a thread. Uh, the first thing that happened was I was working in the computer science field in the arena of artificial intelligence. And so I've always been fascinated by learning and how we learn. And so that's what I was doing. I was working in the artificial intelligence field, and I was in a head-on collision on the highway, and I broke my back at T12, and I had to be airlifted, and I had less than 5% chance of walking again. And I think that was really the beginning of this like dramatic shift
Mhm.
in, you know, growing up in Iowa, very conservative family, like not super religious necessarily, but very super conservative Midwestern values. And, anything kind of woo woo or spiritual was just not part of my upbringing. Education was very highly valued, science was very highly valued. And so I have a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science. And so I'm working in the artificial intelligence field. And then I was in a head-on collision, and that night in the emergency room, I was excruciating pain. I knew my back was broken, and a nurse came over and whispered in my ear, and she said, "Imagine that you're floating on a cloud." And so I closed my eyes and imagined that I was floating on a cloud, and it shifted me. It shifted my body. It shifted my being to float on a cloud. We have to be light. And
Mm.
I was not in a place of lightness when I was in, when we're in pain, we're cleansing, we're tightening our bodies. And so it really shifted my whole energetic being to do that. And I think it's the reason why I recovered so dramatically. I mean, I do have metal rods in my back. I do have a fused spine, but I was able to play soccer a year later.
Wow.
So that happened when I was in my 20s, and anything that dramatic just really shakes up your life a bit. And so I decided, my life could end at any moment. I can see that, right? We're 1 minute we're fine, the next minute we're in a head-on collision on the highway. So I decided, what do I really love? I'm going to do what I really love in life, and that is learning. And so understanding learning, understanding how we learn. So I went on to get a PhD at the University of Chicago. My advisor was Mike Csikszentmihalyi, who recently passed away in
I saw
October.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so he was my advisor, and there's a whole story around that, but I won't go into it. And so he's fairly conservative, like his work is, academic and science based. But he really also was a champion of mine, and I really appreciate that. And so, dear Mike, just take a moment to thank him for his mentoring. Anyway, so I finished my PhD, and I was just fried, mentally fried. It was 7 years of just heavy academic reading and just, yeah, intensive academic thinking. And so I couldn't continue on in an academic path at that moment. I needed to rest my head, my thinking.
Mhm.
And the only thing that really spoke to me was the creativity. That was life, right? That's the richness of the creative. And so I did a lot of pottery making and things like that. And I also, just as a lark, I attended a class at the Berkeley Psychic Institute, and which was a total lark for me. But I was like, hey, I'm trying all kinds of things now. And that was really interesting for me, because what I noticed was that I wasn't predicting people's futures. I was dropping below the surface to metaphor, and this sort of, I could see people stuck in mud, or I could see people trying to open a window that was never going to open, or it was all metaphor that I was reading. And so I did that for a while, and I taught at UC Berkeley in their teacher credentialing program. And then I moved up to Montana and was a hippie for a while and lived in a teepee. And then I was yearning to teach, so I came back to the Bay Area, and that's really when my work started again. At one point I was interviewing for a teaching position at Meridian University, which is a graduate school of psychology, and the president of the school asked me what I would like to teach in his program, and the word metaphor was spoken through me. And I didn't say it, something else was speaking, and I didn't know anything about metaphor or a study of metaphor or how it related to learning or how it related to psychology. And he said, great, we'll call it the psychology of metaphor. And I was like, wow, great. Sounds wonderful. Class of PhD students coming up in 2 months. Okay. But like all these books just started showing up randomly, like out of print books, amazing books that there was one by Martin Foss called Symbol and Metaphor in Human Experience. And it was published in 1949. It'd been out of print for decades. At the time it was published, it was considered to be one of the most important books of the 20th century, and it's like completely forgotten now. And that he was one of the greatest philosophers too. And Martin Foss's work, I highly recommend. But there's others, George Lakoff at University of California, Berkeley has done 40, 50 years of research on metaphor. Exactly. It was, to me, George Lakoff's work is profound.
What I love about that story and about how you followed that. I'm actually going to ask that again. What I love about the story you just told about finding metaphor, and we'll talk more about what you mean by metaphor and how to use it in a moment, but you followed what showed up. And I've been struck by that in my reading of your work over the years and my conversations with you. I don't know that I've always been able to do that. And I think I want to know how you did it. How did you follow it? I mean, how did you take what had to be a lot of leaps, and I'm sure financial insecurity, and, there are consequences to taking the alternative path. And I don't know, I'm not saying the alternative path is always the best path, but you've found a lot of great liveliness.
I think it was my fascination. It was really my fascination, and I knew there was something else. I spent 7 years in a PhD program, and Mike Csikszentmihalyi was actually in the psychology department. I was in education. Everybody in my department was studying really, I hate to say this, I'm sorry people, but boring things. I was bored. I was so bored. And so I had to go outside of the department to somebody who was doing something unique and different, and as much life as I could find. And it's interesting, at the time that I actually asked Mike to be my advisor, my father had just passed away too. And so I was really in that place of, I can't do anything boring. I can't do anything deadening. I can't do anything that doesn't feel alive. I'm going to devote my life to as much life and as much creativity as possible. And maybe that is seeing somebody you love that I'm so close to, pass away so young. I think, life is so short. I'm going to live my life just maximizing the creative, and maximizing the richness, and maximizing the depth, and maximizing the beauty. And something like that. I was fascinated. Yeah.
I love that, the fascination. So to go back to metaphor, I think metaphor is the answer to this question. How do we enter the realm of non-ordinary intelligence to unlock creative genius and inspire breakthroughs? The title of an upcoming book, I believe, or a subtitle.
So this is this whole shift in this other way of knowing, this other way of being. Our culture is so much into the left and the right hemisphere, or the left hemisphere, our analyzing, our thinking. And as babies, we have this other way, this very aesthetic oriented body way, this feeling sense. We feel our way through the world. And we still do that as adults. Like if we resort to metaphor when we don't understand something, we know when we're going through something that we don't know how to handle, we're feeling our way. We don't know in our heads how to navigate it. So we're feeling our way. That's metaphor, to feel our way. Like I feel like I'm on fire now. I feel like I'm stuck now. I feel like that feels like a wall over there. That feels really opening over there. That's, we have that language, we have that way of knowing, but it's buried and we don't really give it a lot of credence because we think that our what we think is so important. And there's this whole other way of knowing that we were born with, but we're just schooled out of it. And again, I have a PhD in education, so I can criticize the school system because I know that, and there's a lot of schools that are doing things differently now and know that, but it's just, yeah, it's just uncanny how even like, so I teach in the field of depth psychology, and so depth psychology is often the study of dreams. Art therapy is in that field. So anything working with image or art would be depth psychology oriented. But what's amazing is just working with imagery will not shift us into this other way of knowing, this other sensory, aesthetic, right brain, right hemisphere way of knowing.
And metaphor is the thing that makes that shift.
It is, because metaphor is not only an image, but it's a feeling sense. When somebody says, I feel like everything's crashing down on me, we can see an image of, oh, everything's crashing down, but we can imagine what it feels like to have everything crashing down on us too. And so I was thinking about this the other day, like if we have to have a difficult conversation with somebody and say, we can't do something or whatever, resorting to speaking in metaphor is very helpful because it allows the other person to feel what we're saying. We're not just coming from a place of cognition. We're bringing this other deeper way of knowing into the conversation and allowing them to feel it. It's very much about very aesthetic, very much into feeling. And that's what brings us into this other arena and takes us out of the thinking mind.
Into the non-ordinary realm.
Yes. And so the one of the books that has been helpful for me in referring to with my work is Jill Bolte's Taylor book, A Stroke of Insight, because she was a brain scientist. She is a brain scientist. She had a terrible injury, so she was her left brain was had injury, and so she only had a right brain available to her. And again, scientists would say this is way too, and people have criticized her work, that this is way too simplistic.
Right.
The brain is much more complicated than that.
And of course, when many parts of our brain have a left and right, they're duplicated, like the amygdala and many other parts of our brain.
Yeah, and I am not a brain expert, but what I can say from somebody who studies learning and creativity is that there's two ways of being. There's this way of being where we're in our thinking and we can tell we're kind of stuck, but we can't get ourselves out of it, and we think we need to think harder or better to get ourselves out of it. And there's this other way of being where we're just allowing something else to move through us and take us and show us. And and that's the right brain. And I love her book because it shows how when we let ourselves go beyond our left hemisphere thinking mind, and something else opens up that is mystical, it's divine, it's the connection. And again, I grew up in a very conservative family in Iowa, just not into the sort of hippie, new age stuff at all. But my academic background allows me to be able to speak about this and say, hey, this isn't just woo-woo hippie stuff here. We have this other way of knowing that we dismiss, that connects us with the divine, which allows us to move into something more intelligence than ourselves, that allow, and to me, that's the creative, right? That's, we can think our creativity is just coming from our small little, selves.
Hmm.
But I am somebody who believes that the creative is bigger than us, and and life wants to move us. And so, and yeah, and we're moved by the creative. We're moved by, the greatest artists and writers often say that, this wasn't me that wrote this book, or this wasn't me that did this art piece. So there's something bigger than us that wants to move us into the creative, wants to move us into creative expression, and we need to let go of our thinking so that we can open that up, open that.
I agree with all that. And I also wanted to ask you, when you talk about the something else or the divine, or that we're brilliant when we align with something greater than ourselves, what is that something? And what if we're not someone who believes in something
Yeah,
in God or the divine? I mean,
yeah,
I am someone who's had a long, varied spiritual life. And at this point in my life, I don't want to say career, but in my life, I'm not sure what I'm sure I don't know a lot. Yeah, at this point in my life, Kim, I don't know what I believe. I do know it that there's a lot I don't know, and I'm really open. And when I read your work and encounter your work, I'm like, oh, that feels so nourishing. But then the science part of my brain comes on and goes, well, what is that something greater than us? And you know,
yeah,
so can you say more about that? I mean, I know one of the things you've written is research has scientifically proven the existence of the intelligent field.
yeah,
I'm like, well, okay, well, tell me about
yeah,
that. Tell the skeptic in me. So
yeah.
my skeptical mind can let go into this sort of non-ordinary intelligence world, because I do yearn for it.
Yeah. It's so I don't know what's out there as far as science goes with the field. I know like Rupert Sheldrake and other scientists have studied that. The piece of research that I'm most interested in is those people that are studying what they call the heart field. There's an
Mm.
institute called Heart Math, that the heart is actually an intelligent organ, and it has a field of knowing. And so that is fascinating to me. Metaphor is the language of the heart. If we're speaking to that deep, it's this deeper place, part of ourselves. And we all do have, you know, even if you weren't spiritually inclined, you would admit there's deeper things happening within us, right? I mean, we have dreams, we have, visions, we have insights. There's something else happening besides what we think at any given time. So we don't even need to go into the fact that this can take us into amazing shamanic dimensions to go with metaphor. But even just, I'm thinking of the poet Stanley Kunitz wrote at one time, that all poets are grappling with, or that, the greatest poets, I can't remember how he said it, but they grapple with one primary image their whole lives, and
Mm.
it's often something from childhood, like Evie White's spider or spider web, Charlotte Web, or whatever. And for me, growing up in Iowa, farming community, is very much about farming and fields and earth and soil, and that kind of depth and richness has nourished me my whole entire life. It's the source of my work. It's the source of my fascination. It's the source of my love. And I think that images and metaphor are speaking to us, whether we believe in something beyond ourselves or not, right? I mean, we're all shaped by, I had a friend grew up in England on the coast, ocean waves, very important to her. Another grew up in Mexico and the markets, so those images are working us at this other place of our being, whether or not and there's so much wisdom there, and there's so much guidance there for us, whether or not we believe there's actually a greater intelligence moving us, if that makes sense.
It does make sense
Mhm.
that we can suspend our disbelief and say, let's experiment with metaphor. So how would we do that? And why would we do it? Well, why, you've really given us a case for why. which is to unlock our creative genius. But can you give us an example of what has happened? I know you've worked with many, many people around this. Like, what's an example of being someone who's stuck and who works through metaphor with you?
Yeah. I'm going to talk about somebody that I just worked with yesterday. So she is an amazing, amazing, amazing painter, and her work is deeply sensuous. And she grew up in a family that was very Catholic. She went to, boarding schools with nuns that would beat her if, she liked a boy, things like that. So she's working with me so that she can actually allow not only shift, so our minds can think, okay, I know I have this background, this work is calling me, and try to work through it cognitively. But when she works with me, she's able to feel what her work wants. She's able to feel that space, and that the fact, like even yesterday when we worked together, like her work wants bigger space. And that wasn't literal, that's a metaphor. What does that mean for her that her work wants bigger space? And she's realizing, oh yeah, I'm still feeling afraid that I can't really do this. I can't really express this sensuality that, because I might get in trouble. Somebody might beat me or whatever.
Hit me with a ruler.
Hit me with a ruler. So, when we can feel what's true, when we can feel what I want, what our work wants, when we can feel what's calling us, it makes a lot of difference. And we're coming from it from a different place.
The feeling place,
yes,
not the thinking place.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you make that point often that it's not about figuring it out or interpreting the metaphor. It's about feeling into it.
It
correct?
Exactly is. Yeah. And I was going to say that, in the field that I teach in, depth psychology, so it's so much about imagery, and I get all kinds of people in my workshops that have been teaching and leading groups for years, working with images. They still have a hard time shifting, because when we work with images, whether it's dream or guided visualization or whatever, we're still in that left hemisphere knowing, that analytical place, like, oh, I got a sun means I should shine more. Oh, I got a truck just came up, I need to move somewhere, take a trip. So we're still in our thinking, but our thinking limits us because we can only think what we already know. We don't have access to something we don't know. We want to have access to something we don't know. We want to
just stop there for a second. We have to have access to something we don't know, because that's what I think really draws me to your work and your work about teaching. Because some of the things that you wrote in the Getting Messy book is being a learner is what allows creative insight to happen. And the more we separate ourselves from the messy business of learning, the more we lose heart for our work. We start to forget that we feel most alive when we're simply offering ourselves, our knowledge, our passion, our interests. So this is a theme of your work for all of these years.
It has been.
That I really resonate with. It does feel so alive, but it also feels really scary. And doesn't feel scary to you. You trust it so much.
Yeah. Tell me where the scariness is for you.
I don't think I think because I have some pretty strong learning, what do we call them now? Differences. We used to call them disabilities. That I am so afraid of all of the mistakes that I made before. I didn't learn until I was almost done with college that I had the differences in my brain, that I have a lot of fear of not doing it right.
Yeah.
And keeping things tidy, if you will. And I also am a very forgetful person, which has increased with age. So I've created a lot of systems for my forgetfulness. So I have a lot of fear around that, I think. And when I am drawn to your work, I'm also repulsed,
Mm-hmm.
like there's
Mm-hmm.
this push pull when I read
Mm-hmm.
your work or get your
Mm-hmm.
emails
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh yeah, there's something really rich there. Oh God.
Mm-hmm.
It's not don't go there, but there's something. Yeah, I haven't really noticed that before, but there's some part of me that's afraid.
Yeah.
And this is from a child who did a child. I mean, but in my teenage and college years, did a lot of hallucinogenic drugs. So it's not that I haven't, had plenty of inner adventures, lots and lots of meditation retreats and sweat lodges. And, I think it's more of a function of age and trying to make things work for my brain.
Yeah.
Because I used to be like, oh, yeah, you should do everything as wild and crazy as you can with alternative ways of knowing.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to get too wild, right? I mean, if we get too wild, then we're lost. So
That's true. And we
when
do too
I,
many drugs, then you're lost too, because we all know those people.
right.
We know those people who didn't quit, who kept going.
Uh, um, so when we work with the creative, we are also working with form. We're also working with structure. So we're not losing ourselves in anything. Form is super important. Form, super, super, super
What do you
important.
mean by form?
So the way it shows up in my work is, we'll tune in and some sort of image will appear. And most people, some people are working pure expansiveness, like they're in a time in their lives where they just need to let go of everything. They're letting go of marriages and work and their definitions of themselves and everything they've ever thought. They just need to let go. That's People that shows up with people is not quite as common. What's most common is some sort of form, because we're all working on being selves in the world, right? We're working a sense of self and definition of my work and who am I, and what choices do I want to make. So that is form. We're defining something. We have lines, and that's the way it will show up metaphorically. And so when we're working, deeply creative people that I work with are also like my painter friend that I just mentioned. I mean, form is always coming up. There's no losing oneself in the creative here. There's no losing ourselves in that drug
Mm.
place. We're always working form, we're working structure, we're working lines, but it's important where those lines are, where that definition is. So for example, size shows up, and when large form appears, it often means, so we have structure, we have lines, we have good definition, but we want to allow more spaciousness. We want to give ourselves more space. We want to give our work more space. Sometimes size shows up as smaller. So I'm still working form, but I want to be smaller in my life right now. I have too many clients. I have too many responsibilities. I have too many obligations. I'm involved in too many people's business, and I just need to get back to my own business, or whatever it is. So it's like pull back, be smaller. So we're never, with this work of metaphor and the creative that I work with, the deep creative, we are never losing ourselves unless we're in a place where we are, what's showing up is let go right now.
Mhm,
Just
mhm.
let go. And other people, might be working, like another a client and somebody who I worked with recently. She's finished PhD in psychotherapy and very hard schooling for years, and then you have to have hours of being certified, all that stuff. And she's working her own sort of inner richness place, like depth place, and so it won't show up metaphorically with her, it's not showing up as lines. Like structure isn't really helping her right now. She's had too much structure. She needs to let go of structure and just sort of feel into her own inner soil and see what's there and dive into that richness. But again, as far as that fear place, it does show up when people, I wanted to press you a little bit to see
Yeah.
what you had to say about that, but fear does show up because we have sort of the thought that we might lose ourselves. There's no losing oneself
I
here.
love that. That's a
We're
beautiful distinction, Kim.
Yeah, we're always working with form when we work. I mean, even when you paint a painting, you have a frame. You write a book, you have paper or whatever. You're a dancer, you have a stage. When we work with the creative, we have form. We want to make sure that form is big enough for our work, but we have form. Yeah.
So what I realize that we've done this sort of deep dive, and we should really pull back and help the listener perhaps have some idea of how they can work this way without you, although of course they could hire you and work with you in a wonderful way as well. But how do you work through finding this non-ordinary intelligence through metaphor on your own?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would love to share with your listeners is that to just know that there's another space available for us. There's
Just stop
another
right there and
space.
take that
There
in.
is another space. There's another space. We are not lost in the problem. We're not lost in whatever.
Mm,
There is a whole other space available to us. I mean, that is a shift right there.
it
Right?
is. And I do that with my clients through meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just the remembrance that you are not stuck.
Yeah. There's a whole other space. There's
Okay,
a
so that's
whole
beautiful.
other
Right there,
space.
everybody take that in. That is
Yeah.
so important. I felt
It's
that shift.
so it's so important. There's a whole other space. And then the other thing that anyone can do is just start paying attention to your language and how you feel. I mean, we'll be in conversations with friends and we'll speak metaphorically, or we'll speak oh, something's hanging over my head now, or I really need to let go. That's all metaphor. So we speak in metaphor all the time. And so paying attention to those ways that we're speaking is going to give us a really good idea of what's going on. And I mean, metaphor therapy and metaphor and coaching has become very popular because it really helps us know what's going on under the surface, in ways that we can't think our way there. They just come through. The other thing that I love, and I have a YouTube video about this, is writing a fairy tale. I mean, that's a super simple way. It seems very childlike, but it's amazing. When we write the words once upon a time, a long time ago, we're taking ourselves into that other space, into that imaginal space. And just allow, once you write those words, don't push it, don't think it, don't write it from that place. Allow some sort of feeling to show up or some sort of inner image to show up, and then just start writing. I think the example I gave in the video on YouTube was, like, oh, I see a path, and the path looks like it's leading somewhere, but I'm not quite on the path, so you're just sort of feeling your
Sensing and
way,
feeling.
seeing and feeling, like
Mhm.
imagery and feeling into that image. And then another thing is just start noticing the aesthetic quality of the world and of our lives. I mean, we walk around in our heads and our thinking, but our world is so beautifully sensuous and our lives are so beautifully sensuous. And there is sort of maybe that cultural thing, like sensuality is not okay or whatever, but
Or maybe nowadays it's more productivity is God. Maybe
exactly.
we've lost some of our, at least, in my listeners' world, I imagine we've lost some of that puritanical sensuality is bad, but we've replaced it with productivity is good. Which
Yeah.
is true. The Puritans were all about productivity too.
and productivity is a great thing. However,
It can strip the life out of you.
pushing ourselves. I mean, when you think about, a pear on a tree wouldn't push itself to produce, a pear tree wouldn't push itself to produce fruit in the middle of winter, right? We have timing, we have seasons, we have ways of being. We want to follow that deeper.
That's so hard for me.
Wisdom.
Oh, that's so hard for me. But you're right. It's absolutely true. And when you push it, you often end up in a really burnout place.
Yeah, I mean, I really got that after 7 years of a PhD program. I
Mhm.
was really burned out for at least, I mean, it took me years to kind of recover from that, to be honest.
I've heard that. I know my own, even though I went to film school, which was supposed to be creative and, fun, it took me years to recover from that experience because it was so not fun and not creative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Some other
Oh,
ways to work on accessing metaphor.
yeah. And then what I love to do, I do this all the time, is I will just ask a friend and I'll have a question in mind, and or I just want to shift. I just feeling a little, like I just want a shift of energy around something, and so I'll ask a friend for an image, whatever pops into their mind.
Mm.
But I won't tell them what my question is because I don't want their thinking to get involved. I'll just say, "What's the first image pops into your mind?" And then I'll do a little writing piece. Let's say it's a, red beach ball. I am the red beach ball, and I'll feel what it's like to be a red beach ball. So metaphor allows us to imagine we can, playing characters in a play, we know we can imagine what it'd be like to play a character. We're doing the same thing here with images. Like, what does it feel like? We're not inside the red beach ball. We're not throwing the red beach ball around. We are the red beach ball. Well, I feel really big. I'm a circle. It gives me a nice sense of wholeness. I really like how light I am. Just those feeling qualities. And what I say in my work, so the mind likes to complicate things. And when we work with images, the mind, like we get a flower, is it rooted or not? Does it have
Yeah.
thorns?
What kind of flower is
Yeah.
it?
It was like, there's a house. Okay, the house has windows and doors. The doors are leading somewhere. So, we'll immediately go into the story place with an image. But
Yes.
what takes us into this other way of knowing is just feeling. Like if we get a door, it's simply a door. It's not going anywhere. What does a door feel like? It's square. It has a nice firmness to it. It's very clear and defined. There's no sort of wigginess of edges here. So we want to go into the two or three primary qualities of whatever image you're working with. Keep it simple. Simple is powerful. Simple is what's potent. If
Mm.
we really want to shift, we have to keep it super simple because when you think about the bottom of the ocean and what's going on, there's not a lot of activity like movement happening there. It's just a subtle shift on the bottom, and then there's a lot of activity on the surface of the ocean, right? So we're going into that place of very subtle shift.
Okay, so you held that question. Your friend gave you the image. You go and write about it from this feeling place, from this being the red beach ball,
Yeah,
not trying to figure out what the red beach ball means or
right.
not being it, but feeling it.
Yes, and imagining. Well, we are being it.
We're being it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're being the beach ball. And that is the power of this work as well, because it is about being. And our work, our lives are so much about doing. What should I do next? What should and
Mhm.
this is like what things happen when we change our energy, right? So this is an energy shift here. If like for example, if I'm having a day that's too busy, I need to work more. An image that's structured is going to help me. A bookcase that is very tidy with nice compartments on it,
Mm.
like feeling that sense of clarity and structure and definition. I'm not getting lost and overwhelmed here. There's this feeling sense of sturdy clarity and
I can feel
definition.
that. Now, do
Yeah.
you then go after you've done the writing of being the image and keeping it simple? Because simple is potent. Love that. Could have that as a tattoo. I'm always looking for tattoos. Never actually get one, but I'm always
I
finding,
know.
all
Me
right, I'm like,
too.
simple is potent. Okay, I could get that as a tattoo.
I'd
We
love to
have
get a
the
tattoo.
I know my daughter and I are always talking about getting the same tattoo. Um, uh, Last season we had Maggie Smith, the poet, on, and she says, "Keep it weirder, make it weirder, make it weirder." I'm like, tattoo. But then, do you go back to the question and see how it relates as a way to work with the question? I mean, finish that loop for me.
Yeah, yeah. So that it'll give me, I can't think of one I did recently, but um okay, so the example I gave was the red beach ball.
Mm-hmm.
Um so we have let's say, this beach ball is fairly big, right? Beach balls are big. So I have a nice sense of size here and circle shape. So I'm not the only one in this world who's worked with this kind of primary imagery. There's an anthropologist, she's passed away. Angeles Arian had
Oh,
done,
Angie Aarons.
yeah,
I loved her. She was
yeah.
very important to me.
Oh,
Yes.
really? Yeah, she's
Hmm.
amazing work. So she studied the five primary qualities or simple shapes, So there's the cross, there's the circle, there's the triangle, there's the square, and there's a spiral, I think, are the five that she's
Hmm.
studied. For me, crosses don't come up very often in my work, but circle and square all the time, all the time. Spiral occasionally, triangle occasionally. But anyway, so here we have circle shape. And a circle shape is very much about individuation, a sense of wholeness, a sense of I have everything I need. So many of us look outside of ourselves, including myself, look outside ourselves for validation or what do other people think? The circle shows us, no, you got everything you need. You're that sense of, it brings me back to a sense of self, circle does. So that image of red beach ball just brought me back to myself, sense of wholeness and ownership right there. I don't know if
Got it.
I was,
And then you connect that to like, so maybe your question was, how do I finish this next section of my book?
yeah,
Oh, circle, wholeness. I have what I need. Let
exactly.
me look inside for, and maybe in that case, you had found yourself, I'm making this up entirely clearly, that you were scrambling for more sources, or you were going back to doing more research and you're like, oh, let me tune into what I have here inside of me in wholeness.
Yeah, it's a
Something
shift
like
of
that.
energy. It's a shift of being.
More a sense of a shift of energy more than a figuring it out. That's what you're telling
Yeah,
me.
and more than it'll give you an answer, but it'll give you, metaphor works in that kind of slippery way, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's not direct. And so it'll give you the answer in an indirect way. I mean, one of the things that I've been going through this year, I mentioned in the email to you, my mother was sick for a long time and passed away, and not for a long time, but yeah, a few months that we were with her before she passed. And I needed to find myself and get back to myself in the middle of that experience. And so often circle energy or circle shape would show up for me when I was there because I wanted to be with her in a whole way, but I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't lose myself either, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Oh,
And
totally makes sense. I
yeah,
walked my mom through Alzheimer's, and I can feel it completely in my body, wanting to save her, wanting to help her, wanting
yeah,
to get her out of memory care when I knew I couldn't take care of her myself, and having to be my own self in those times was sometimes very difficult. And
yeah,
other times it was incredibly wonderful.
yeah,
Like, oh, I still have my life to live.
exactly. Yeah, like yeah, exactly what you just said. I'm glad you fleshed it out more, from what I just said, because yeah. So that's one way that, we're not getting a, so often I would ask, friends while I was going through that with my mom, give me an image because I'm in pain right now or I'm hurting or I want just what you said, I want to help her and it's like, no, honey, you're okay. Sense of
Mhm.
self, get back to self. Everything's here. It's
And
just
she
a very,
has to walk alone. We all have to walk alone through so much of our life, but
yes.
especially the end.
Exactly. And we're walking alone, when we're doing creative work.
Yes.
It's ours to do. So many of my clients, they want partners or whatever and partners in their creative work and when you're really gifted in something, it can be lonely. There's not somebody that's on your level, right? You're doing the work. And so um there's a sense of wholeness there that shows up often, when I work with clients, like just the sense of it's yours to do. It doesn't mean you're going to be a lonely hermit on the mountain, but
No, but
it's yours to do.
there is a deep there's a deep agency that comes with true creative work and true creative voice. And that deep agency can feel very lonely
Yes.
because you're the one who's making the choices. You can't do it by committee.
No, it's not a committee thing. It's not
Yeah.
let me share this, with,
Yeah,
and women often want to do that.
that's
I've
true. I find
noticed.
that a lot with my clients. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I can't do this for you. Anything else you want us to know about working with metaphor on our own?
Um, I think the biggest thing is what I said at the beginning is like, there's
Mm,
just know that there's another way, know that there's another answer, know that it's not the Jungians will work with polarities, right? Things are polarized. There's a third space, there's a third way. Yeah.
beautiful.
Hmm.
I love to ask this last question of all of my guests. What would you like to learn next?
Mm. Let's see. So one thing that I'm toying with is that I have had a haunting around music in my life, and I've pushed it away because it doesn't make any sense. Like I'm not a great musician. I'm not a great singer. I thought you had a lovely voice when you sang before. Um, but it doesn't make any sense, right? I'm doing great work. I love my work. I'm helping people. It doesn't make any sense to pursue music.
Mhm.
But it's haunting me and it's haunted me for years. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing about learning is just learning to be more myself. I mean,
Mm.
I'm just, view myself as very nerdy. I don't fit very many places, and just owning that more and saying, okay, I'm going to just be me. I'm going to love my quirks. It's okay that I don't fit, kind of thing. Yeah.
I feel that very much so. I led my first in-person event at the end of October of 2021, and it was so great to be with lots of people like ourselves. And one of
Yes.
my longtime student clients was there, and I know how nerdy she is. She's an extraordinary nerd. And at one point, she said something in the circle about Amy said, you might have noticed I'm a nerd about this. And when she was done speaking, I said, about this.
Right.
I made
Right.
some joke, and she called her husband that night and told him, and she said he laughed for 2 minutes straight.
Yeah.
So nerds
Yeah.
unite, and as we age, may we have more and more space to be the metaphor we are.
Exactly. Be fully ourselves in all our nerdiness and all our quirks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Hmm.
Thank you so much, Kim. This was a really rich conversation for me. I can feel lots of energy shifts, and I'm very grateful for your work.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.